So let me start with Jerry, and then we'll move on and take questions afterwards. Jerry?
Thanks, Mark. Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming. I'm supposed to talk for about 15 minutes, and I've prepared some comments, remarks that I think will run that long. And, Mark, if I go over, just give me the hook, please. I'd like to begin by talking a bit about a column that David Brooks wrote last week in the Times that I thought was particularly interesting. He wrote about efforts to dismiss President Obama as a socialist. I've got an excerpt here that I think relates to the paper that we're presenting today. This is from David Brooks. In a sensible country, people would see Obama as a president trying to define a modern brand of moderate progressivism. In a sensible country, Obama would be able to clearly define this project without fear of offending the people he needs to get legislation passed. But we don't live in that country. We live in a country in which many people live in information cocoons, in which they only talk to members of their own party and read blogs of their own sect. I think this issue of sex and extremist views is a problem on both sides of the immigration debate. There are extremes on both sides. But I think the group that is most active in promoting views that are distorted, false, and destructive is the Southern Poverty Law Center. That is why I wrote the report. I'd like to tell you a story that's in the report about a man who has been convicted by what I call the SPLC kangaroo court. Kangaroo court in the idea of a court that's called for the express purpose of reaching a verdict that has been predetermined. His name is Roy Beck. He's the executive director of Numbers USA. For many years, he was an environmental journalist. When Beck was a young man in the 1970s, one of the environmental issues that was most important to progressive groups was population growth. It was a central theme of the first Earth Day back in 1970. Beck became concerned about the trend line in U.S. population growth. He knew that our population had reached 100 million in 1915, 200 million in 1967, and then it reached 300 million in 2006. And unlike the 1960s, when the principal source of growth was baby boomers, it's now driven primarily by immigration. In 2008, the Pew Research Center offered this analysis, quote, "If current trends continue, the population of the United States will rise to 438 million in 2050, and 82% of the increase will be due to immigrants arriving from 2005 to 2050 and their U.S.-born descendants." End quote. There are also credible projections that say our population could reach 600 million by the end of the century. In our report on page 6, we have Robert Samuel of the Washington Post talking about what he sees as a failure of the press to raise and elucidate this issue in the immigration debate. In 1996, Roy Beck wrote a book with this title, The Case Against Immigration. The subtitle was The Moral, Economic, Social, and Environmental Reasons for Reducing U.S. Immigration Back to Traditional Levels. Note, he's not talking about cutting off immigration. Traditional levels means about 300,000, which long characterized our immigration policy. Now it's up to a million many people who get green cards every year. And, of course, we have the folks who come across the border illegally or overstay their visas. Francis Fukuyama reviewed the book in the New York Times. He said Beck had written, quoting now, "in a way that fosters serious debate rather than name-calling." He also wrote that Beck's argument, quote, "are presented carefully and dispassionately and deserve serious answers." Now, a year ago, Heidi Beirich of the SPLC wrote about Roy Beck in a piece in which she attacked FAIR, Numbers USA, and CIS, our organization. Her piece was called The Nativist Lobby, Three Faces of Intolerance. In it, she wrote this: "Roy Beck says that he is no racist, and his website and other writings do not contradict that. But she was not about to concede that Roy Beck is a decent human being who seeks to present legitimate concerns in a reasonable voice. Beirich wants you to believe that despite a record that is long and clear, despite what he says and writes and believes deep down inside, Roy Beck is a racist in her view. Pay no attention to his record. Pay no attention to his website where he says in big, bold letters, "No to immigrant bashing," and where he writes, quote, "The chief difficulties that America faces because of current immigration are not triggered by who the immigrants are, but by how many they are." Heidi Byrick of the SPLC wants you to believe that if you strip away all that superficial stuff, you'll find that Roy Beck is really just a puppet on a string held by one John Tanton. Now listen to this statement on a video that's posted on the National Council of La Raza's website for its Stop the Hate campaign, in which the SPLC has played a central role. Quote, "Roy Beck may look very plain-spoken and somber about the issue of immigration, as though he's just concerned about the environment or population growth, but he has a past with Tanton that's deep and goes back to Tanton's racist beliefs." Now, there are many words a reasonable person could use to describe this guilt by association stuff, and Lord knows my wife Marie and my colleagues have heard a few of them. But in this forum, and in the spirit of David Brooks's hopes for a more sensible country and a more civil discussion, I'll just call it nonsense. But this nonsense is at the heart of the attack on FAIR, Numbers, USA, and CIS that has been launched by the SPLC, National Council of La Raza, and several affiliated groups. Let me talk a little bit about John Tanton. He's a small-town doctor from northern Michigan. Like Roy Beck, his immigration concerns were preceded by environmental concerns. He has played organizing roles at the Sierra Club, the Audubon Society, Zero Population Growth, the Nature Conservancy, and the list goes on and on. In 1979, he founded FAIR. 6 years after that, he helped found CIS. A decade after that, he helped Roy Beck start Numbers USA. But in the narrative constructed by the SPLC and then carried forward by La Raza, that's all you need to know about FAIR, CIS, and Numbers USA. Everything that comes after that, no matter how responsibly these groups lay out concerns about the demographic, social, economic, and political effects of mass immigration, they must be seen as tainted by John Tanton, whom they depict as the puppeteer, the sinister leader in a conspiracy of bigots that must be denounced and insulted at every turn. Now, I first want to say that Tanton has said and done some things that I personally reject. As I write in the report, his organizational talents come with a downside. He's an eye doctor from a small town in northern Michigan who has a tin ear for the sensitivities of immigration. And as I write in the report, Tanton is correctly called the founder of the modern movement to restrict immigration, but he has also helped to undermine that movement. In an arena that requires the ability to frame issues in a way that broadens consensus, he sometimes speaks with a freewheeling bluntness that even those who admire him find upsetting. Some say that Tanton has shown a tendency to be unnecessarily provocative, a tendency that some have used to change the topic from immigration to Tanton himself. Tanton has become the great distraction, the great diversion.